It turns out that if you know the genotypes of two organisms that are mating with each other, and if you know which particular traits are dominant and which are recessive, then you can use that information to predict the chances that the offspring will have a particular trait. And so the reason why we can make these predictions is it's based off of a lot of the work that was done by an Austrian monk named Gregor Mendel, and we'll actually talk more about his experiments in class. But for now, we'll show you how you can go about making those predictions as far as what traits offspring are going to have. And so to show you how to do that, we'll just look at a couple of examples. And so here's the first example we'll take a look at. So say that there is a plant that's heterozygous for flower color, and it mates with a plant that's homozygous for the recessive flower color. I forgot to write recessive, but that should say homozygous for the recessive flower color. And it turns out that purple color is dominant over white. So if you have this information, how can you use it to predict the chances that the offspring from these two flowers will have particular traits? So to be able to make that prediction, you'll have to know what the gametes of both of these plants will look like, right? Because it's the gametes that are going to fertilize one another in order to produce the offspring. So to know what the gametes look like, it'll help to know this information that you're given up here. So if you were to take a look at the cells of this particular plant, because this plant is heterozygous for flower color, that means that you would expect to find in this plant cells an allele that encodes for purple flowers. And again, because it's heterozygous, that means that on the homologous chromosome, you would expect to find a different allele. In other words, the allele that encodes for white flowers. If you consider this plant over here, we're telling you that it's homozygous for the recessive flower color. So that means if you were to take a look at the chromosomes in this plant's cells, you would expect to find an allele on one of them that is the white flower allele. And because, again, he is homozygous for flower color, that means that on its homologous chromosome, you would expect to find the same allele, or the white flower allele. So if you know this, now you can figure out what the gametes of these two plants will look like. So say that this is a germ cell from this plant. You know that in order for this plant to make gametes, its germ cell is going to have to undergo meiosis. And remember that during meiosis, what occurs is that the homologous chromosomes become separated during meiosis 1. And then during meiosis 2, the sister chromatids end up getting pulled apart. And so basically that's what produces the gametes for a particular organism. And so you see here for this flower, for this plant, when it produces gametes, half of its gametes will have the purple flower allele in it, and the other half of its gametes will have the white flower allele in it. For this plant over here, all of the gametes that it produces, you'd expect them to have the white flower allele in it. So then how about, in order to simplify, how about if we get rid of some of the duplicates? So we know here that it'll be 50-50 as far as alleles in the gametes, purple to white. So to simplify, we'll just get rid of the extras, 50-50. We'll get rid of some of the extras here. And so now you know, or now that you know, what the gametes from each plant look like, now you can predict the chances that the offspring will have a particular trait. And so the traits of the offspring from these two plants will depend on which one of these gametes fertilizes which one of these gametes, right? So it's kind of a chance thing in terms of what the offspring end up with. So let's say, for example, that by chance it's these two gametes from both plants that end up fertilizing one another. If that's the case, then you can tell that this offspring that's going to be formed, its actual flower color will be purple. And the reason why is because the offspring is heterozygous, right? He inherited the purple flower allele from one parent, the white flower allele from the other parent, but purple's dominant over white. So the actual flower color of this plant offspring will be purple. So if you're interested in keeping tabs as far as what possible flower colors the offspring can have, we just showed you that it's possible for these two plants to have a purple flowered offspring. What if it's these two gametes from both parent plants that end up fertilizing one another? It looks like the same deal. So again, if you were to look at the actual flower color, it should be purple because purple is dominant over white. So we're saying that it's another possibility is to have another purple flower colored offspring for these two plants. If it turns out that these are the two gametes that end up fertilizing one another, then you can see that the actual flower color of this offspring will be white. Right? White allele, homozygous for white. So since we're keeping track, how about if we notch one down for a white flower offspring being possible? And then the last possibility as far as gametes fertilizing one another are these two. So what if these two are the ones that by chance end up fertilizing one another? You can tell that the actual flower color of this particular offspring will then be white. So we can notch down white for that. So basically, by looking at the numbers that we've been keeping track of here, if the question is, what are the chances that these two plants will have a purple flowered offspring, you can see that the chances are 2 out of 4, or 50%. Right? So in other words, every time these two plants have a little baby plant, there's a 50% chance that it'll be a purple flowered offspring, and there's a 50% chance that it'll be a white flowered offspring. There's a way to do all of this predicting kind of in a easier, cleaner, and faster form. And the way you do that is by constructing something called a Punnett square. And so what we'll do next is show you how to construct Punnett squares. And you can use Punnett squares in order to answer all kinds of questions that have to do with Mendelian genetics. So to show you how to set up a Punnett square, we'll kind of go through that very same example, except this time we'll try to figure things out using a Punnett square. So again, say that there is a plant that's heterozygous for flower color, and it mates with a plant that's homozygous for the recessive flower. And again, it turns out that purple is dominant over white. So if you're interested in predicting the chances of the offspring being a particular flower color, how do you do that using a Punnett square? Well, here are the steps to setting up a Punnett square. The first step is to determine how many traits are being studied. The next step is to choose letters to represent the alleles for each trait. And the things to keep in mind when you're doing this is that you want to make sure to use just one letter to represent each trait. And by convention, you want to use capital or lowercase versions of the letter to represent the dominant or recessive alleles respectively. So here's what we mean by all of this stuff right here. So step one is to determine how many traits are being studied. Well, we're showing you here that the plant that's heterozygous for flower color mates with another plant that's homozygous for flower color. So the only trait that we seem to be interested in here is the flower color trait. So there's only one trait that's being studied here, flower color. And so the term used to describe that is a monohybrid cross. So we're crossing two plants here. We're only interested in studying the chances of one particular trait being inherited. And again, that one particular trait is flower color. So step one is checked. How many traits are being studied? Just one, flower color. Step two, choose letters to represent the alleles for each trait. So again, we're only studying one trait, flower color. So that means that we should only be working with one letter here. Alright, so it says use one letter to represent each trait. So one letter for each trait. We only have one trait, so we should only be working with one letter in this particular example.